Well, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. The agricultural community is very much a part of this community, and from an economic engine as well as just a cultural keystone within our community. I'd like to thank the board of directors for hosting this, President Gonzalez Brady, Vice President Rossi, and then Vice Presidents Wilson, Hoagland, Brady, Garcia, and for each of you, they do a lot on behalf of our community. We'd like to thank them for hosting this meeting. Today, we'll talk about water supplies from a Southern California region and then trickling down to our local supplies. So we'd like to thank Brandon for joining us today to talk about Met supplies and impacts on rates. And then Eva and Rich will talk about our own water supplies, how that trickles down to us. We'll talk about salinity, which I know is very important to each and every one of you. And then finally move into our financial picture. The board acted swiftly last year with the uncertainty of the economic conditions, and we froze rates. This year, we're looking at implementing some rate increases, but also using our reserves to mitigate the impact to each and every one of you and the community at large. And then beyond that conversation, we'll also talk about the agricultural programs, which you all have taken and have really embraced, from crop swap to the efficiency program, and then my water tracker, which I know you all have reached out to Justin. I think several of you spoke with Justin just today, and that has yielded about a 10% savings. So real demand reductions yields real cost savings. And so with that, Kimmy Wall will be helping us host today. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kimmy. Kimmy?
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so glad you could all attend this virtual meeting. I'm Kimmy Wall, the new Public Information Officer for Rancho Water, and also your moderator for today's meeting. Before we begin with today's robust agenda, I have a few technical notes for our attendees so we can be sure that everyone can ask questions or make a comment as needed. During the presentations, please keep your microphones on mute. If you require technical assistance, please use the chat function to speak with the host of the webinar. If you have a question for a presenter, please use the Q&A function to submit your question, or use the raise your hand function to let the panel know that you would like to speak. If you're calling into this meeting on a phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Once each presentation is complete, questions will be taken as time allows. And again, at the end of the agenda, questions and comments will be taken once again. As the moderator, I'll call your name as it appears on your screen or the last digits of your phone number, and you'll be asked to unmute so you can ask your question or make your comment. We look forward to making this an interactive meeting, so don't be shy if you have questions or comments. With that, I'd like to move on with the agenda and turn the meeting over to our Assistant General Manager and Chief Financial Officer, Rick Aragon.
Thanks, Kimmy. So I just wanted to take a quick moment because I couldn't help myself to introduce a very special guest for us, Brandon Goshi, who is the Manager of Water Policy and Strategy. Unless, Brandon, you've gotten a promotion since the last time I talked to you, which wouldn't surprise me. Brandon has helped us out greatly over the years giving these updates, and is really, in this time period, looking forward to this as there's kind of a pivotal year for us with dry weather and looking at going heavily back into a drought stage. And so seeing all the value that we get from Metropolitan with our partnership with them. So Brandon, just want to say thank you and let you go ahead and kickstart the meeting.
All right. Well, thanks, Rick. And Rob, it's nice to be here. You know, I had a long streak of coming to this meeting that was broken last year, unfortunately, but I'm really happy to be back and bring some information about Metropolitan, its water supplies to this meeting, and be available to answer some questions about things that might be going on. So let's see, share this. Will somebody let me know if it's showing there?
It's up.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, today, I'm really going to talk about two things, but a couple of parts in each thing. So talk a little bit about the current supply condition for Metropolitan as its wholesaler and how we're looking, because everybody knows that it's dry, how we're looking on storage and the use of that storage for the rest of the year. And then a topic that is a tough one to talk about, I think, this year in particular, but regards to our opportunities for blending and providing salinity levels and giving an outlook on that. So I will get started with that. Brief background just on Metropolitan that I will do every year. We're the regional water wholesaler for Southern California, 6 counties in Southern California. And we have 26 member agencies who can purchase water from Metropolitan. Within the service area, that 6-county area, there's 180 plus retail water purveyors. And Rancho California is one of the water purveyors that purchase water through Metropolitan, through Eastern Municipal Water District, and through Western Municipal Water District. In total, Southern California has about 19 million residents and a 5,200 square mile service area that Metropolitan system helps to augment the water supplies for. Supports a really big economy, and a little dip last year notwithstanding. I think a strong and thriving economy that water is an integral part of. Where does Southern California get its water? Well, locally, groundwater supplies, surface water supplies, water recycling projects, seawater desalination in some parts of the service area, and conservation comprise, really what we call local supplies or locally supplied water to the service area. The rest of the supplies are imported, and those supplies come from the Sierras up in Northern California, and also the Colorado River watershed, which I'll show you in a second. But 3 large imported sources of water supply. First is the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which is controlled locally by the city of Los Angeles. And so that water supply imports water from the Sierra Mountains. The Colorado River Aqueduct, which is Metropolitan's first imported water supply system, gets water that originates in the upper Colorado River Basin and travels a long way down the Colorado River Aqueduct to our diversion point in Lake Havasu. And we are also the state water contractor for Southern California, for Met service area. Metropolitan is a state water contractor, and water from the Sierras goes through the California Bay Delta and is diverted through the California Aqueduct as part of the State Water Project, and brings water in from the north through that State Water Project. So let's talk a little bit about current water conditions and take a look at both of our systems. I'm going to start with the Colorado River supplies. And I'll first start by saying that our Colorado River supplies for the year are basically set off of last year's conditions. So any question about water shortages or things that affect the Colorado River really have to do with time as we go forward, but not in the current year. So this graphic, which is a little bit outdated, but not too outdated, as of 3/7/2021, you can see the graphic on the left showing that upper Colorado watershed and the dryness. And without getting too technical about it, red is bad. Browns are still bad. You're looking for shades of blue in a graphic like this, and there aren't very many shades of blue in this current graphic. So it's relatively dry on that upper Colorado River watershed. How dry? Well, over on the right, you can see a graphic that shows the water content of a sample in the upper Colorado River watershed that is cumulative through the year. And so the blue area shows the normal amount of water content that builds up in snowpack and then runs off. And that water content of the snowpack was about 11.3 inches. That's before the big storm that came, I think, last week through that Denver and Colorado area. So that's going to increase to some extent. 82% of normal in terms of the snowpack. I wanted to point out something that is going on in the Colorado River Basin, though, and that relates to the runoff from that snowpack that makes it into the river and then gets into the Colorado River system. I think, one could say systematically, that amount of runoff that makes it to the river has been impacted by the amount of warming that is taking place in the Colorado River Basin. Last year, there was close to or near normal snowpack and only 50% of runoff normal. And so that is a big structural change if that persists, meaning that it takes a lot more snow to get the same amount of water in the river, and that would affect the supplies going forward. On the state water project, this is hot off the presses, actually. I actually took the liberty of making these slides and then modifying them about 2 hours ago. And you see the title here, DWR maintains the state water project allocation at, it formally said 10% of our state water project allocation, despite the, with the help of late January storms. I've made 2 corrections there. Today, the Department of Water Resources announced that they would be lowering the currently allocated state water project amount to 5% of our table A, even with the storms and precipitation that's fallen since the time of their last study. So they do these studies on a monthly basis. Check the snowpack, you can see that picture there. It's very dry up north, and the projection for runoff in that system and other issues affecting the operations that affect the allocation of water for the state water project contractors is necessitating the lowering of that allocation to a current 5%. That doesn't mean that can't still improve. And this is actually one of the first times ever in history that a currently allocated amount, that 10% was reduced. Just for scale's sake, 5% allocation change is about 100,000 acre feet less water that we're being allocated now off of that system. This allocation will finalize in April or May when the snowpack, essentially when that snow season is done. And as I said, it can increase, but probably it's hard to say whether or not it will increase. This graphic basically shows the same snowpack information with 62% of normal snowpack and a lot of red, brown on that state of California graphic with regard to precipitation. Very little blue, very little purple. That would indicate normal or above normal conditions. So the whole state's dry. This graphic shows precipitation to date and the wide range of precipitation that can take place in a given year. The blue shaded area shows the minimum amount of precipitation measured at what they call the 8-station index, 8 different stations measuring rainfall and combining to one index. 17.1 inches is the lowest that index has been through the measurement of the water year. And the wettest it's been is 94.7 inches. Now that's a lot of big difference and a lot of difference in water and runoff that feeds that system. As of, basically the beginning of March, there was about 18 inches in that index, and a projection of where that could go by the end of the rainfall year based on historical rainfall to date is really if conditions were normal or average with regard to rainfall, about 30 inches total, where the long-term average is about 51 inches. So 20 inches of rainfall difference. And again, that's a lot of water. This band basically shows a 90% or a 10% exceedance, or another way to think about that is if it was really dry, how much rain would we probably end up the year with, or if it was wetter than normal for this point forward, how much we'd end up. And you can see, even with it being wetter than normal from here on out, we still wouldn't probably reach average conditions for rainfall. So that's just feeding more information into whether we think the state water project allocations might increase. So what does that mean in terms of supplies and demands? Well, a couple of quick graphics here on that. This bar shows our estimated current trend of demands for metropolitan water supplies, which are a combination of retail water use minus the locally supplied water that I talked about earlier. Our estimate is about 1.46 million acre feet of demand for metropolitan water supplies. When you add to that obligations and losses in our system, we have a total water requirement then of about 1.57 million acre feet. And I would want to point out that that's still relatively low in the big scheme of demands on Metropolitan. Just as an example, in the 1990s, we had demands on Metropolitan up above 2 million acre feet and upwards of 2.5 million acre feet. So this is almost a million acre foot less of demand that we may be seeing this year. On the bright side, that helps us control, manage our water supplies, but that's the number that we think we're trending towards in terms of deliveries. On the supply side, we have about 1 million acre feet of Colorado River supplies that is our basic apportionment plus programs along the Colorado River, plus the delivery of exchange water through the San Diego programs. But about 1 million acre feet of Colorado River supplies available. This now is outdated. 191,000 acre feet of Table A supplies off the State Water Project at a 10% State Water Project allocation. That would have given us 1.2 million acre feet of supplies, which means we need another 375,000 acre feet in order to balance our supplies with the 1.57 million acre feet of demands. Well, that number is now lower, or adding about 100,000 acre feet of additional need to that 375,000 acre feet. But that statement there still holds. That amount, even 475,000 acre feet, we should be able to manage and satisfy that through purchases of water transfers and the operation of our storage portfolio that has a significant amount of water in it. So we've started taking actions already, even before this decrease in the allocation, regarding water transfers, regarding removing water or withdrawing water from some of our storage programs, like with DWR, with our State Water Project groundwater banking programs that we have in the Central Valley, and our in-region storage like Diamond Valley Lake. And so you can see that we've started withdrawing some of those actions in anticipation of having to fill this gap. We are in the fortunate position of having amount of water in storage right now. As of the end of last year, 3.2 million acre feet of storage. And you can see from this graphic, which is a long history that shows our emergency storage down at the bottom and dry year storage in the grayish looking bars, that we have 3.2 million acre feet of dry year storage available to help us meet demands. And I think I was saying that about 475,000 acre feet of need. So there's a significant amount of storage relative to the amount of need that we would have in this year. And so that's why I can make a statement that I think we're confident we can meet those demands. We got a couple graphs. I'm not a big weather forecasting fan when people say how's the outlook going to be, but the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they like to do this kind of thing. So I'm just showing that in the next 3 months, NOAA is projecting that precipitation will probably be below normal. That's that brownish looking across California, or continue to be below normal. And temperatures would be above normal or hotter. And the combination of both of those two things, particularly in the Colorado River Basin, would lead to not an increase in supply. So, you know, the idea or the chances of getting additional water supplies through more precipitation or less evaporation through the heat is being diminished at this point pretty well. I did want to point out one more thing on water supplies with regard to the Colorado River, and that is that USBR, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, does a study to look at the range of potential future operations and the impact on storage. And so they did this one in January, and it showed something pretty interesting. This graphic, which looks a little bit complicated, but it shows that going forward, when we look at the range of hydrologic or kind of precipitation and temperature outcomes that could go forward, that by 2021, the levels of Lake Mead are likely to be below what they call the shortage trigger elevation. And that is under a lot of the different cases that could occur over the next 12 months in that 24-month study. What that means is that there's a high probability or a greater chance of actually having a shortage declaration declared on the Colorado River. Now, that's troubling because that means that supplies can be impacted. In the lower basin of the Colorado River Basin users, California has senior water rights, and this will probably affect Arizona and Nevada prior to it affecting Metropolitan and California. But this is still out there in terms of challenges to that water supply system. So let's talk a little bit, just briefly, about what that means for water supplies from Metropolitan in terms of salinity and blending. So what kind of water can you expect, especially down in the area that you're in from Metropolitan? So just a brief primer here on how the water moves through our system, and you know, this area, your area is closer down towards the Robert A. Skinner water treatment plant, down on the bottom right side of the corner of the map here. So state water project supplies come in from the north and generally move through our system this way that you can see in the green. You can see over in the Ventura area, over by the Joseph Jensen water treatment plant, water comes in from the west branch of the State Water Project, and then on the east branch through Lake Silverwood and down the feeders towards the Skinner treatment plant. Added to that is our Colorado River Aqueduct supplies that come in from the east. And ordinarily, those supplies are blended to deliver blended water through our system. That's important from a salinity standpoint because the State Water Project has a lower salinity rate than the Colorado River, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. In high State Water Project allocation years, you generally get lower salinity around the entire system because there's more water from the state to be able to push through the system. In low State Water Project allocation years, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So more of the system sees Colorado River water sources and less State Water Project water, leading to higher salinity levels. So a couple takeaways here. With the now 5% State Water Project allocation, the blends in our system are currently decreasing towards a 0% State Water Project, 100% Colorado River blend. It would be at 0 already, but we've had some shutdowns, planned shutdowns of the Colorado River Aqueduct. So we've been delivering some state water, but that's decreasing and is operationally planned to go to 0 for the rest of the year. Lake Skinner, which provides some of the water for this area, it's currently at 33% blended State Water Project to Colorado River, but is also going to be decreasing towards 0 as those shutdowns are over and we refill Lake Skinner with Colorado River water. Water that bypasses Lake Skinner will also be matching the system blends of 0% State Water Project. I know this doesn't sound good. There's a little bit of good news in here, and that is that as of mid-March, the salinity levels at Lake Skinner was about 482 TDS. The Colorado River Aqueduct TDS is about 574, which is actually really low for the Colorado River. We've seen that upwards of 650 TDS. And water in DVL, Diamond Valley Lake, is at 258. So to the extent that water is being delivered mostly from the Colorado River, sometimes supplemented by DVL water, you should see salinity levels at below 600, which in a year with a 0% State Water Project blend is actually good. You know, that's a good thing or good news. So in summary, it's very dry all over. State Water Project is at its lowest level it could be, basically 5% of our Table A allocation. Storage is at record levels, and that's going to help us manage this. And our blend and salinity concerns are heightened with the low State Water Project supplies. We will do everything possible to operate the system in a way that is least harmful to the customers, especially that are sensitive to salinity, but our options are essentially pretty limited for this year. And that concludes my presentation, and be happy to take questions.
I don't see any hands raised at this point. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand. Okay, Brandon, I think you might be off the hook.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it's nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm Eva Pleiser, the Assistant General Manager for Engineering and Operations. And it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Ottolini, our Water Operations Manager, and also Jordan Farrell, our Water Quality Supervisor. They will cover the next two topics, and they will cover the local conditions. You heard Brandon cover the state and the Western US. And as you heard from Brandon, it's not looking very good. It's dry. Rich and Jordan will give you the flavor for what we have in store locally. And as a prelude, I'll let you know that it's also dry. We are trailing or matching very much the statewide conditions in terms of precipitation. So you'll get a bit more details from Rich, and I will pass it on to Rich, and he will inform everybody of the local conditions.
Thanks, Eva. That was a great presentation from Brandon. And my presentation basically is going to focus on our Temecula Basin, our groundwater basin, both the hydrology and also the climatic conditions. As you saw, it's dry. And my presentation, unfortunately, is not going to say anything all that much different. So with that, we'll go ahead and get into it. Kind of want to lay the groundworks. Everybody can see presentation? We're good? Please worry about that.
Yes.
Okay. I want to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit. You know, surface flow and groundwater flow are a little different. Obviously, you know, surface flow is greatly impacted by the current conditions. You can have a change in stored rapidly. Groundwater conditions are a little different. You know, those recoveries take longer. You don't see as great a recovery in the basins as you do in surface water. So I put this slide forward because it actually shows the big picture and the impact that this picture has to local groundwater supplies. Basically what I'm showing is NOAA's graphs on the conditions that we've had as far as wet weather and dry weather. And really the takeaway is we've had more months, obviously, of dry weather. We all know that. The other thing that's important to take away from these slides is that not only are those periods longer that they're drier, they're more intense. So you see, you know, like the drought we just came out of a couple of years ago, really dry, long conditions. So it kind of sets up, you know, the idea of how groundwater recovery takes a little more time because we need those periods of wet weather that are extended, that are more mild. In other words, not these torrential rainfalls that just run out to the ocean. We need those nice days where it rains and it stops and things actually get to percolate into the groundwater basin and restore our levels. So looking forward, as you've seen from Brandon's presentation, we're looking at dry conditions. It's definitely a La Nina condition for us. This slide's showing the Columbia University's designation of that. They're predicting that maybe in the spring we'll see a little bit of a change. And we'll talk a little bit later on about that in the presentation of where we sit currently. But again, it is dry. You've seen that. This slide just matches up with NOAA's predictions. You know, Columbia University is predicting all the way through the year that we're going to be dry. And obviously NOAA's doing the same. The check marks are telling us, yep, we've experienced that. We've experienced dry weather with the question mark for January through March. And I've got a little bit of good news, but again, it's good news that it's a little wetter, but it's not good news that it's going to save the day. So this is a little like Brandon's slide, a little kind of showing the local rain conditions within the Temecula Valley. First, we'll go ahead and look at the monthly conditions. That white line is our average monthly rainfall throughout the year, throughout the weather or water year. And then the red line there shows where we currently are. So as you can see, starting off the weather year, which is October through September, we were behind. And then we flattened out really bad December, January, and then obviously February, we had a real dry February. We did recover. This March we're, it says 114%. But again, if we go now to the other graphs, other pictures on this graph, we're taking a look at that current cumulative, and we are far behind. We're 60%. Blue line, or that blue shaded area, is the cumulative over time for the water year. And as you can see, we're trailing behind, and much like what Brandon has said in his presentations. So locally, we're not faring any better than the state or the Colorado River project. So what does that mean for our groundwater production, and how do we as a district respond to that? Because obviously our groundwater basin is, very important to us. It's not important just for today, but it's also important for tomorrow. So what we try to do is we try to balance that production to make sure that we have a resource that we can bring forward into the future and make sure that the Temecula Valley is being capable to be served, not just from import water, but its local sources also. So what does our local area look like? Well, this is a slide showing the Santa Margarita watershed. And basically our basin is kind of the Temecula Basin sits at the confluent of both Murray Creek and the Temecula Creek. And it drains the western mountainside and obviously to the east of us. We have in our basin a number of different ways to produce groundwater. We definitely leverage the conjunctive use idea and also native supply. So how we do that is the basin's divided up into essentially three different aquifer systems if you look at it. There's the upper aquifer, which is our Pablo aquifer. It's a shallow aquifer. We have a deeper Temecula aquifer. That's our bank storage, if you would. It's the long-term storage that we've had. And then we have a combined production where we actually take water from some wells that are perforated in both of those aquifers. Along with that, we have a recharge facility that we take raw water from Lake Skinner or Vail Lake water. And what we do is we, in essence, put that on the spinning basin up at the upper VDC and let that water go into the basin. We do have what we call put and take operations where we're actually extracting that water right there at the VDC. And then also some of that water migrates its way down through the basin to recharge those other two aquifer systems. The last 3 years, we've been able to leverage some of the excess that we've experienced in those wet years to buy additional Skinner water, Metropolitan water, raw Metropolitan water, and in essence, bank some of that water for future use. Again, that was part of the conjunctive use strategy that we use in the valley. Again, from this slide, you can see that most of the groundwater production is in that younger upper Pablo Valley zone, with about 41% of it coming from that zone, 17% coming from the deeper aquifer, and a 6% blend from the combined aquifers. Now, this is just showing the Temecula aquifer system. We do have other production throughout the basin, but overall, about 64% of our groundwater budget that we do every year is from this unit. So what's Rancho's philosophy? How do we make sure we maintain this system so that obviously everybody has this in the future? What we try to do is look for the long term, and our budgets as we set for our groundwater production is based on that. We try not to exceed the recharge over a long-term basis. We don't want to have that groundwater level or that water table reduce permanently, right? We want to be able to, at times like we did in the drought, leverage it, but then also allow for that recovery. If you think about it like a savings account, right? We hit hard times, we maybe use a little bit or more of our savings, but then we don't use so much that we end up going out of business. We also are cognizant and aware of water quality impacts. Again, we don't want to impact the basin as such that we draw down it, that we start seeing water quality issues, whether that be from iron, manganese, arsenic, fluoride, or other things that could be within the basin. And then one of the things that we do have, and we have a very robust subsidence monitoring system throughout the valley. And that's just basically keeping an eye on to make sure that we're not lowering the elevations within the basin. So taking all that philosophy forward, what we do at Rancho is every year we meet with our hydrogeologist and we put together a groundwater audit. Basically, that audit looks at groundwater levels. There's a very elaborate, very high-end groundwater model that is integrated both with surface flows and groundwater that we utilize and leverage to project out our pumping for our projected pumping and see what that impact would be on the basin. We do also review all the hydrographs, which are basically groundwater levels over rainfall and production. We also look at our scheduling as far as what's offline, what wells are in rehab as far as needing to be worked upon. And then again, we bring all that and we prepare this annual report, and that's drives really the local supply that we're going to have available to us for the next year. Part of this whole idea of good management is that it's not a one-shot look. It's every month operations is taking a look at production capabilities, groundwater levels, inflow, rain, and if we need to tailor or if we need to decline some of our pumping in certain areas, we'll do that. And again, with the idea that we do not want to impact the groundwater basin to a point where we can't recover. So it's really first and foremost in our minds. This graph represents the long-term trends within our basin. And it's kind of a little clumsy, but really what you're looking at is anytime you see the gray lines going downward, that's a drier year. As it goes up, it's in essence showing a wet season. And really what I want to focus on here is, we all think about we've had a 5-year drought, where in reality within the basin, it's really a lot longer than that. We've had since about 1999, we've been experiencing drier conditions, and that gray line shows that anytime we deviate downwards shows a drier period, which in essence talks to a drought. The blue line represents what that impact has had from the drought on our basin. And the one big takeaway that you can see is that 5-year period where we really got hammered with this extended and intense drought. So the question is, what do we do about that? And what you've seen Rancho do over the last 4 or 5 years is reduce the groundwater take, the native groundwater take from the basin, and also bring in those supplemental supplies like we talked about, the bank storage, cyclic storage when Metropolitan had excess water. We brought that into the basin to try to help that recovery and help the sustainability of the basin. I love this graph. It's a lot of information, but it really speaks to a lot of the issues. The blue line represents our groundwater levels. Obviously the other graph is from NOAA, and that's representing the climatic conditions throughout our area in the state of California. And then the red line is our response to those climatic conditions and the basin. So as you can see, when times were good, when we had those nice winters where we got rain and we had a little bit of dry, but then we got another year of rain, we were able to obviously produce more groundwater. As you see those drier periods come in, you start seeing that red dashed line being reduced. And that's our response. That's Rancho's response to those continued dry periods. And it's really to try to flatten that blue line out and not have it continue to go to a point where we would not be able to see recovery. So the good news is, because of the actions that we've taken, both bringing in additional sources for recharge and also that cut in production, this graph represents both the Temecula and the Palva aquifer systems, what the recovery has been. And the good news that we can say is that although we've had a period where you see between about 2012 and about 2017, a decline in both systems, starting about 2017 moving forward, when we implemented some of these policies, you can see that recovery to the basin. Again, it's not as dramatic as you see in surface sources. Groundwater guys like me, You get to look at that and go, it's a good thing. But other people look at it and go, well, that doesn't look all that much different. It's not like going out and looking at a lake and one year it's dry and the next year it's full. That takes time, but this is a good trend, and specifically towards the tail end, 2020 to this year, that upward trend is what we want to see continue. Again, it's for the sustainability of the basin to make sure that we have that supply for the future. And we're really focused on making sure that we recover. We did, like I said, use the basin to help us get through those dry times. And in essence, now we're in that recovery period. So let's talk a little bit about Vail Lake, because that is another resource that we have, as we saw on that slide with the conjunctive use. It is a water supply that we do use within the basin. And this slide, again, a lot of information on it, but basically what it's representing how much water that we've actually been able to utilize out of Vail Lake to put back into the basin, which means that that's the amount of supply that we wouldn't have to otherwise either purchase as raw water from Met or treated water from Metropolitan. So overall, there's a lot of inflow, outflow, but the takeaway is that groundwater recharge number, that 14,000, almost 15,000 acre feet of recharge that came from Vail Lake. Since we've been able, we acquired Vail Lake, we were able to leverage the supply more for water resource, which has really helped us out through those dry periods. And again, it is a resource that captures the local runoff, stores it for a period of time. And what we tend to do now is, let the lake recover to a point to where we can get the quality of the water within it well enough, the TDS low enough that we can get it back into the basin. Because that's really where we want that water. We want to be able to put it in the basin where it's not going to evaporate and be available for our groundwater production. So the takeaway for this next coming up fiscal year 2021, we're going to produce about 15, almost 16,000 acre feet, or 28% of the production will come from our native groundwater. We're going to take an import, like we spoke about, that Met raw water recharge is going to be about 14,000 acre feet. That will go up into the VDC, the recharge ponds, and be produced or migrate down the valley. We're going to tap into that storage that we put into the basin for about 2,000 acre feet. And all told, we're going to produce from all this water about almost 32,000 acre feet of groundwater, which is about 56% of the total production that is projected for next year. So all in all, not bad, considering the conditions that we're in. So with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to go ahead and take them.
Thank you, Rich. At this point, I'm not seeing any questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to turn it over to Jordan Farrell for a review of salinity levels and management efforts in the Rancho service area.
Thank you, Kimmy. Can you see my slides okay? And hear me okay?
Not quite yet. There we go.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Farrell, the Water Quality Supervisor, and I'm going to provide a very brief review of the TDS and chloride content of our system from the past couple of years. So starting off with TDS. Perfect. As you can see, this chart compares TDS concentration from 2019, 2020, and 2021 to date. Each year, as categorized as groundwater wells, import water from Metropolitan, and a blend of system water. And there's also a trend line that indicates the percent of state project water allocation that each calendar year had from Lake Skinner supply. So going back to 2019, as you can see, over half of the import water was state project water, which was favorable in TDS concentrations. So we had an average of around 400 parts per million of TDS from Metropolitan that year, which resulted in a system blend of 410 parts per million. Going to 2020, that state water allocation dipped down to 32%, and the TDS increased to 500 parts from 400 parts, which resulted in our system blend averaging from 410 to 440. And then where we're at now, as Brandon was saying, the target blend is set at 0%. And now, while we're not at 0% as of today from Lake Skinner, it'll be there in not too distant future. So to date, our import water is around 570 parts per million TDS from Metropolitan. I definitely see that increasing. In last quarter of 2020, we were at 0% from Lake Skinner, and the average TDS was around 620 parts per million. So I definitely see that increasing this year. So while our system blend is currently at 500 on average, I see that going upwards to between 525 and 550 parts per million. And then moving on to chloride, same kind of a format as the last slide, comparing chloride data from 2019 to where we're at now. Same picture, same idea, same concepts. The more water we receive from Colorado River water and less from state project water, the higher the chloride concentration is, though it's not as drastic as what TDS shows. So in 2021 to date, our groundwater sources on average around 104 parts per million. The Metropolitan import water is around 97 parts, and our blend is around 103. So while I do see that increasing this year as we do get more of the Colorado River water, I don't see it increasing it as dramatically as what TDS does, but it will be higher than around 103. So as I mentioned, this was a very, very brief review of our TDS and chloride content from our system. So in review, our current allocation from Metropolitan is set at 0%, though it's not there yet. It'll remain at 0% until further notice when that time comes. This will no doubt lead to an increase in TDS and chloride concentrations in our system. And then for more information, up-to-date information, visit the water quality section of our website, where we post our samples from our system, which are taken every 2 weeks. TDS and chloride data are on there, as well as daily import flows from Metropolitan. And then with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Jordan. Any questions from our attendees? Okay, looks like no. Thank you, Jordan. Moving on to the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget rate impacts with Rick Aragon.
Thanks, Kimmy. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Did it come up for everyone?
Yes.
So yes, as Kimmy mentioned, name's Rick Aragon. I'm Assistant General Manager and Chief Financial Officer here for Rancho. And I get to cover what is nobody's favorite subject, which are the financials, and specifically the proposed rate increases that we have in discussion with our board right now, and all entailing from the budget. So a little bit of a capture of all of the information that you've just heard between the regional water supply, the local water supply, elements of our operations all sort of get reflected in the budget and the numbers I'm going to share in a bit. Really about 5 major things wanted to cover fairly briefly with the group. The one is what we did with rates, or specifically what we didn't do with rates this year, out of concerns for all of our customers, especially as COVID first hit. The other being some kind of historic challenges that the district is facing financially from outside pressures that we're seeing, both from Metropolitan, but specifically on energy from Edison. So I'll get into more detail on that. Then you've got what is the good news, which is our work with the board and coming up with plans on everything we can possibly do to lower what would be pretty significant rate increases to something much more manageable for the community. Go into what those rates specifically are, at least as proposed to the board, and then a few key pieces of information out of the budget that might be useful for the group. So on that first point of what the district didn't do for relating to rates for COVID, it was really this time last year presenting proposed necessary rate increases for the board. We were looking at the time for fiscal year 21, 2.5% increase for Rancho and 4% increase for Santa Rosa for the year that we're currently in. Obviously, COVID impact started in March with the shutdown, state and nationally, and our board responded very, very quickly with the direction, not only to before the governor even imposed his moratorium on water shutoffs, so customers wouldn't be affected without the ability to get water during this trying time. Really the immediate deferral of any consideration of rate increases till we were much further along in coming out of this recovery from COVID. We had thought at the time it would be 6 months so that we might be able to revisit it in the fall. Obviously, that didn't happen. So it was for the full year that we didn't implement those rate increases. And really key to that whole discussion is that in order to make that happen, because we were still seeing cost increases on energy and from Metropolitan and just normal inflation costs on our things like our materials for chlorine and what have you, we had to use about 1.3 million in savings, or we call reserve use, in order to make that happen. And combined with what were some pretty creative operational strategy changes, cuts, some things just reflective of COVID, obviously not being able to do travel. So another 700,000, or essentially 2 million in extraordinary measures to make it possible to not do rate increases for fiscal year 21. All of that to say, when we look at rate increases for going forward, it's cumulative for really 2 years. When we look at the next year's rate increase that we'll talk about, is reflective of not only the cost increases that we see for next year where the budget is, but also all the ones that we didn't cover with rate increases for this year. The first real challenge that we're dealing with is a very significant one. And it's everything that you heard from Rich from our operations department in managing the groundwater. And so essentially what that boils down to is, in order to keep our groundwater levels healthy and sustainable and hopefully recover moving forward, we had to do some drastic actions. You see in fiscal year 17 that we were at about 24,000 acre feet of native well water. So this isn't water coming from other sources like Metropolitan that we put in the ground, but from local sources. And the steep correction that we had to do going forward, roughly about 8,000 acre feet a year in reduction, was in response, as Rich mentioned, to try and stabilize and help for recovery of the groundwater. So 8,000 acre feet a year is roughly a third of our native water production that we had to reduce. And frankly, the way that it's looking now, that will, I wouldn't be surprised if we stayed at that level until we see some significant rainfall for a while. And so what that means for us financially is that for every year that we're at those levels, we're paying over $8 million more for Metropolitan water in order to make up the difference. And so the good news is that in all these years from fiscal year 18, we've been able to pay that $7 to $8 million more without it going on rates. And so just to give some sense of perspective, if it were on rates, that would have required at the time something to the tune of an 11% all-in rate increase for Rancho, or something pretty close to 15% for Santa Rosa. We didn't put that through, and that was through a lot of scraping together of other funding sources, frankly, using some investment revenues on our long-term kind of capital reserves, capital facilities reserves that we figured we could redirect without harming any of the programs, and some one-time funds that will eventually wear out, and we'll have to come up with another plan. But for now, we've been able to not put that on rates. What it also means, though, going forward, is those same sources that we've been able to help address this problem aren't available anymore to help address the new challenges moving forward. And so just to really summarize, and they come from two major sources, those challenges moving forward that affect the rates that we're talking about and going into the next fiscal year. The standard one for us is the normal cost increases for Metropolitan. Obviously, we get over 60% of our water from Metropolitan, so it's a very significant source of cost for us. And so just their cost increases alone factored into our budget, we're looking at over a 10% budget increase, totaling about $4 million that we have to find an ongoing source of revenue for, which translates into rates. And the other one, which is new news in the last few months, but very significant, is we've gotten word from Edison, our power provider, that they are contemplating, if not fully and finally adopted, what is the equivalent of between essentially now and the end of the calendar year, a cumulative close to 30% rate increase on their part. Obviously, the district is a very heavy user of power, both to pull water out of the ground, to distribute it throughout the service area, and to get it up some pretty steep elevations, especially up on the west side with the Hill and the La Crest and Duluth areas. And so it's our third largest source of cost. And so what that means for us is an extra $1.1 million in costs in going forward that we're going to have to deal with also with ongoing revenues. And even on the natural gas side, which is a supplemental source of energy to move some water, especially on the west side, looking at higher than normal increases of 6%. So you combine these really two categories, just the cost to buy imported water and the cost of energy, which we have no control over, even though we've protested to Edison officially about this increase. We're looking at $5 million in increased cost, or essentially, if we just translated these two things alone into what would need to be rate increases to pay for it moving forward, 8%. These two things alone would be an 8% rate increase. The other piece to this from an operational focus, before I get into some good news, is a key part of what the district has been focusing on in the last few years, and certainly our focus moving forward, is the need to address aging facilities. In the 90s and early 2000s, the district could have been characterized by growth, obviously dealing with the growth in the area and a lot of new facilities coming on board. Well, things are transitioning. We're for the most part there, and need to now focus on what we have. And so in terms of historical costs, the district has invested over $1 billion in capital facilities. If you looked at what it would take to replace that, at least 2.6 billion. So we're dealing with billions of dollars worth of infrastructure necessary to get reliable and clean water to our customers. And it takes quite a bit of effort, especially in cost, to keep that both maintained and to replace things as they get to the end of their useful life. And so almost all of our staffing focus, both new staffing and reorganizations, have been on having operations staff to focus in on maintenance and on asset management, looking into the future, so we make smart decisions. This trend is continuing into the next year. Our one essentially personnel change that we're proposing to our board is the addition of a manager solely focused on maintenance projects. So we've added line staff in recent years to focus on things like valve replacements and what have you, and now need to have a manager dedicated to maintenance. And so able to focus in on that and develop the most efficient maintenance strategies moving forward. Other sort of piece, although it's a high dollar amount, it's good news overall for costs, is we've got about $1 million included in the budget for beyond normal maintenance, for major plan maintenance. All of this money is a strong investment in reducing costs in the future to prevent breaks and other things which are more costly later on than if we invested up front. The good news there is we were able to find non-water rate funds in order to cover those $1 million in major plan maintenance. And then the good news to be able to say is the board and staff have worked, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, on a number of initiatives to try and move the needle as much as we can to help with offsetting these rate pressures. And there's some big dollars associated with what we've been able to do to help with that. First on the list, really last few years, have been doing whatever we could to take sort of spare savings that we could put together to get our CalPERS plan and our retiree healthcare to healthy levels of funding. So to pay those in advance. So we're not like any number of government agencies that you hear on the news that are really struggling to be able to pay for these costs. Largely, we've been able to get to a healthy level, 90% funded on CalPERS and about 100% on our retiree healthcare. And what that has translated for our customers is the bills we would have gotten from these plans for next year are close to $2 million less than what they would have otherwise been. That's significant. That's very significant in terms of rates. And so going forward, we are predicting to have very stable levels of expenses relating to these. And so unlike a lot of other agencies that are seeing steep increases, this won't be one of those in our projections, and so wouldn't be affecting rates. The other one, which really came about this year, is we were able to take advantage of the ultra low rates, just like other people have with their mortgages this year on 2 or 3 refinances. Well, the district was able to refinance a portion of its debt to save a little over $2 million in debt service costs. This is all debt originating from the building of facilities, capital facilities, and infrastructure. And with that savings, we're putting that directly to work over this 3-year period that we're looking at rate increases, and using close to $2 million of that to lower what would have been much higher rate increases. So that goes directly to benefit customers. Rich also mentioned what he called cyclic storage. So a few years ago, when there was water up north, Metropolitan made a program available, so to speak, to take that early, to put it in our groundwater basin and to pay for it later. And so we have that water in the ground now and we'll be taking it out. But just the fact that we're able to use raw water instead of treated water is saving us about $500,000 for next year. And then lastly, all the work that we've done on the maintenance side with well rehabs and other infrastructure improvements, we're able to increase the amount of raw water from Met that we're taking compared to treated water, which saves us about another $300,000. So all of that, again, directly benefits and offsets what would have been higher rate increases. So lastly, getting to the major numbers, what's before our board right now for consideration is a 3-year rate increase. We've done this really strategically to try and balance what would have been very high pressures in the first year to smooth them out over the next 3 years to make them manageable and predictable to our customers so that everyone can plan around it. They know what it's proposed to be. And so for Rancho, for all of our customer types, for every type of rate on a normal bill, we're looking at a 3.9% increase per year. And so if you just want to do your calculations, you take any part of your water bill and it would go up 3.9% for each year, starting with July 1st of 2021 and adjusted each July until we get to what's fiscal year 24. And so for Santa Rosa, that's 5.6% per year for each of our customer types going forward for the 3 years. Santa Rosa in particular would have been well over 8% without using reserves and some of these other savings that we're able to do. The main difference between the two divisions really comes down to that Santa Rosa has a large amount of infrastructure and relatively few accounts there to help pay for it. And so it just has less tools and extra sources of funding to help offset what are the same rate pressures for Rancho that has a few other fiscal tools in the chest to try and help out. So another way to put this, especially for the agricultural customers, which are really driven obviously by per acre foot costs for each of the divisions, we put in what are the equivalent per acre foot costs in this graph for each of the divisions. And then as a comparison, just to show what that is compared to what we have to pay to Met for treated water. And so for Rancho, including what's a typical energy rate for our agricultural customers, we've been able to stay at about $650 per acre foot for the last 2 years because we didn't raise rates in this fiscal year. And that's going up in the next couple of years to 676 and then ultimately at a little over $700 per acre foot. For Santa Rosa, we've been right at $960 an acre foot, and then going up to a little over 1,071. And then on the treated water side, and this is really just to show the value of the other sources of water that we have, both the native that Rich talked about and our recharge sources, to bring down what is the blend. In each year of those, you see that the Met cost is substantially higher, starting at about $1,100 an acre foot and ending at close to $1,200 an acre foot. And also just to note, because we didn't raise rates, although it definitely, I know it seems like a steep increase when we look at the 5.6 for Santa Rosa. If you did it as an average over the last 2 years, looking at 2.8% per year if we would have raised rates this year, and for Rancho a little under 2%. Just a couple of key things on the operating budget side. Obviously, water sales is a huge driver of our costs because that determines how much imported water we need. Typically, we're relatively stable on native water supplies, which I'll touch about on the next slide. And our water supplies compared to a lot of other districts change very significantly from year to year, really depending on weather. So you see sort of the height of the most recent drought with dry hot weather in fiscal year 18. We had touched close to 59,000 acre feet in total demand. But in the last couple of years where we had wet winters, just below 50. So a huge change depending on weather. And obviously our agricultural customers, specifically avocados, react the most year to year, depending on whether we get wet winters or not. Our agricultural sales, just to give a sense of perspective, have averaged about a third of our total sales, and that's still the case between the two divisions at a little over 18,000 acre feet a year. Most of those being in the Santa Rosa side at about 14,000 acre feet, and a little over 4,000 acre feet for the Rancho division side. In terms of production, the good news is really on the red part of this graph, red being the raw water that we're able to recharge into the groundwater basin. In our sort of historical average without additional measures has been about 13,000 acre feet. We're getting up to about 16,000, 15 then 16,000 beyond that going forward, taking advantage of work that we're doing out at our recharge basin and additional wells and rehabilitation there. And so all the additional recharge water that we're able to do in essence offsets treated water, which is more expensive by about $300 an acre foot, a little bit more. And so those are direct savings on the operating budget and to the rates. So covered this a bit already, but the metropolitan rates are a large factor for us. In the orange are the rates affecting the upcoming budget and rate for the first year. So 2020, about 2.7% for treated water on that increase that we didn't raise rates for, so we have to play catch up with that. And then 2021, and these are calendar year basis, and 2022, more moderate 2 to 3.5% increases. In the years after, which affect the outlying years on our rate increase schedule, seeing higher pressures as they're seeing higher pressures, both from lower water demands, as Brandon mentioned, as well as having to bring back into place certain parts of their rates that they've suspended, and dealing with just infrastructure costs in general. And so getting closer to 5% increases on the treated water side. For raw water, similar story, a little bit higher pressure there on the raw water when we get to 2023 at close to 7% of an increase. This impacts us even more as we transition more and more to raw water. So overall, just a quick snapshot of our budget and how that's changing. The district's looking at a little over an $81 million budget for operating budget for next year, close to a 6% increase. A good portion of that is the Metropolitan Costs, as you see on the source of supply. That's a little misleading. Doesn't seem like that large of an increase, the 1.8 million. But if you look at the year prior that we didn't raise rates, as I said, it's cumulative. And we're looking at, on a budgetary basis, lower sales, so less sales to split it over and to cover the costs. The big one is on the energy. As I mentioned, Edison's increase is causing our energy budget alone to go up about 15%. We're fortunate that the district invested and contracted for solar facilities, which produce the equivalent of about 25% or more, depending on the year, of our power. So not all of the Edison increase impacts all of our energy use. And then benefited, as I mentioned, on our benefit side. So those costs are staying stable, and really other being the only other category that's going up. And those are really the major plan maintenance projects that I mentioned that aren't covered by water rates. We found other funding for those. Last sort of little note beyond the fact that our budget is very driven by water and energy. Over 65% of the entire budget are those two costs alone. The board saw a detailed analysis in the last month as we took a deep dive of what our other costs are and what are driving those costs to go up, to get a better understanding. And sort of a key metric that came out of that was that if you take all of our costs for the entire budget and you took out water and energy, you took out all of the costs that we incur for compliance reasons. The district's a very heavily regulated entity over water quality, over wastewater quality, over health and safety reasons, and a number of other organizations, air quality and the like. And all the costs related to maintaining the system, repairing it, fixing things like mainline breaks, and even just the cost to send out customer bills. There's only about 1% of our entire budget left over after these core costs that there's really very little discretion if we're going to meet our mandate of providing reliable service with clean water. Last couple of things, as I mentioned on the staffing plan, only real change that we had proposed moving forward was the addition of that one position focused as a maintenance manager on maintenance projects. So our entire labor budget going up, inclusive of the position and overtime and everything else, about 3.6%. When you translate that into a historical perspective, the district did a number of efficiency measures over the last few years. You see that on the red line with our number of employees. And so we were able to bring that down a bit, really shedding management level employees for a lot of that. And then as we've been adding on, these have been operations focused, employees focused on maintenance. And so we have brought back some of that, really getting just a little over historic levels. At the top of the spreadsheet, we like to keep this updated and share with our board and the community is a standard metric. It's simplistic. It doesn't capture the whole story, but just we do our number of employees over 1,000 accounts. The district has over 45,000 accounts. And so when you take this into account, we have on average three and a third employees for every 1,000 accounts. When you look at that versus the regional other entities, where you could say at least at the bottom of that level, especially for similar other agencies like Elsinore and Eastern, definitely bottom of the pack, most efficient characteristics. And then some of the other districts, which might be more wholesale or different customer makeup, show higher numbers. But try and do the most we possibly can with the least number of staff. And then just to round out really the substance of the presentation, in the first year, everything is based on a very detailed budget. In the second and third years, we take that detailed budget and we modify it with some really key assumptions, parts of our analysis. And so this is just a breakdown of how each key assumption gets placed into what is the rate increase requirement for those years. Some key things there are, one, we're going to continue to be able to benefit for the water that we pre-stored into the ground over the next 2 years, really about 2,000 acre foot a year, which definitely is a benefit. Able to get and keep our recharge amounts from Metropolitan at about 16,000 acre feet. Not seeing large amounts of growth in our water sales, only about 1%. This helps to maintain our current blend of sources rather than having to add more imported water in it. And then the other piece, which is the major driver, are our Metropolitan costs. And so depending on which type of water or which charge, we have fixed charges with them. You're really looking at 4 to 6%, depending on the year, of cost increases from Metropolitan. I think we'll be lucky if we see only a 5% increase going forward beyond this next big year of the 30% increase on energy, and a really sort of standard inflationary increases on all the sorts of chemicals and other materials and services that we get in the 2 to 3% range. The last piece, which is just a gross dollar amount of the sources of funding that we try and bring in to offset rates, very sizable. On the Rancho side, as I mentioned, has a little more tools in its tool chest to be able to apply to work here. Between $5.6 and $6.6 million coming in that would otherwise have to be brought in by rates. Most of that coming from investment income on our long-term savings and investment accounts. Santa Rosa, less available to be able to do that, but about 2.5 to 2.6 million. Most of that coming from savings on some of these refinancings that we've done. So our real next steps with the board, if there's any interest in being engaged in the rest of the process, this Thursday, our Engineering and Operations Committee will hear in detail about our non-operating budgets, our capital facilities plans, where we might have to issue debt to pay for that, and all the things relating to the funding sources there. And really, our board meeting in April on the 8th, a comprehensive look at what everything in the budget looks like in a draft budget document, looking at rates, again, before we send out the notices to the community and what we're proposing for what ends up being a rate hearing for adoption on June 10th. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions and Just a reminder, we do put this presentation and all the materials on the website, specifically ranchowater.com/ag customers.
Thank you, Rick. All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment. We'll give it just one more second.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Kim.
And finally on our agenda, we have Justin Haisley with the agricultural effort update. Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Kimmy. Let me get my screen up here to share. Is my screen showing, Kimmy?
Yes.
Great, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin Haisley. I'm the Water Use Efficiency and Grants Manager for the Rancho California Water District. And my title is actually a two-part title. On one hand, I'm in charge of developing and implementing our conservation and water use efficiency programs for the benefit of all of our customers, including our agricultural customers. But also I'm the grants manager, which means that I seek funding sources to actually help pay for those. So we source funding from a variety of different agencies at the federal and state government levels. And we've actually been very successful in getting grants over the past decade. Over the past 10 years or so, we've probably gotten about $20 million in grants. And one of those grants actually was for a project that was designed specifically for the agricultural community, and that's crop swap. We got about $3 million from both the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for that project. And I'll get into that one a little later in the presentation, but these are the topics that I wanted to discuss this afternoon. Three of these are water use efficiency programs that I want to remind everybody that exist and are available for your participation. And lastly, I want to go over a new ag policy document that we're bringing to the board at the April board meeting. So first is our My Water Tracker upgrade. I think a lot of us are familiar with My Water Tracker. We've got probably half of our agricultural customers use the tool to be more water efficient. Basically what the tool is it's a web-based tool where you can log into your account, log into your account on Rancho Water's website, go into My Water Tracker, and you can monitor your water use in real time. And we've had this tool for quite some time. It's available to everybody. But during our 2019 stakeholder meetings, where we invited the agricultural community to come in and tell us, what is it that we can do for you to provide you with conservation and water use efficiency benefits, the agricultural community requested that we change the My Water Tracker tool to be more suitable for agricultural customers' use. So we did two major things here. One was we made our water consumption data more real time. And what I mean by that is a couple of years ago, you could look at your hourly water use data, but you couldn't see it until the next day. So if it's April 2nd and I go to look at my data, I'm going to see all of my hourly water use data from April 1st, the day before. So it took 24 hours for that data to be updated. Now, however, you can look at your data from just a couple of hours ago. So if it's 11 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and you want to know what your water usage looked like from 2 or 3 hours ago, you can go ahead and look at that on the My Water Tracker website. And again, that's an update that we made specifically at the agricultural community's request. So a very valuable tool. One way it can be used, and one way I've been told that it is used from the farm manager's perspective, is just managing the workforce. I had a grower tell me, or a farm manager tell me, that he pulled over in his truck on the side of the road, got his phone out, logged onto the Rancho Water website, got into My Water Tracker, and he wanted to make sure that one of his employees had turned the water on at a particular property. So he logged on, he took a look at the data and saw that the water had been turned on at 8 a.m. like it was supposed to be, and he was able to perform remote management in that regard. So a very valuable tool for that farm manager. Also, the second way that it's been updated, the My Water Tracker tool has been upgraded, is customizable leak alerts. We've always had leak alerts for the My Water Tracker tool, but the way they used to work is you could sign up for a leak alert when your usage was continuous over a 24-hour period. And while that may be useful for a homeowner down in the valley, it's not very useful for agriculture because it's very common to see usage run for 24 hours consecutively for days at a time, especially when you get into those hot months in, say, July, August, and September. So what we've done here is we've created customizable leak alerts that can be set up for each one of your accounts. We've got runtime alerts where you can be notified by email or by text if your runtimes exceed a certain threshold. So if I know my sprinklers are supposed to run for 10 hours or 18 hours, I can set the threshold there. And if they run another 15 minutes, or if they run another hour, I'll get a text alerting me to that, and I can act upon that notification. The second kind of leak alert that we have there is the flow threshold alert. Some of the farm managers, a lot of them have gone to the trouble of counting each sprinkler in every one of their irrigation blocks, and they multiply the specified flow rate by the number of sprinklers in that irrigation block, and they know exactly what the flow rate should be on a Monday or a Tuesday. And you can go into the My Water Tracker tool and set the flow threshold. If you think you should be operating at 25 gallons per minute, you can set the threshold there. And if that flow is exceeded, you'll get your text, you'll get your email, and you can react to that. So those are the upgrades that we made to the My Water Tracker tool specifically for our agricultural customers. And I encourage everybody, if you didn't know about this, to log on, sign up, and use the tool. One more little tidbit here is that we do look at the consumption over time among customers who use the My Water Tracker tool, and we compare that to customers who don't use the My Water Tracker tool. And for our agricultural customers, the customers who use the tool use an average of 10% less water than those who don't use the tool. So I think that data shows that it is an effective and useful tool for our ag customers. So that's My Water Tracker. I'll move on to Crop Swap, another very popular program. And this is the one I was talking about earlier in terms of grant money. We received $3 million in grants from DWR, Department of Water Resources, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for this program. And basically what it does is it pays for swapping out your crops. It pays for crop conversions. And in the beginning, what it did is it paid primarily for switching from a high water use crop to a lower water use variety of a different type. But we've made some changes. We've made two changes, actually. The first change we made is we've relaxed our eligibility requirements. It used to be that in order to be eligible, you had to have used 65% of your allocation in one of the previous 5 years. And a lot of people were eligible under that criteria, but some of the people who were calling and wanting to participate did not meet that standard. So we took a look at things and we explored the idea of looking farther back in time under that eligibility criteria. So at this point, the framework for the program has been changed so that you need to have used 65% of your allocation in one of the last 10 years. So we've got a couple hundred more agricultural customers that are eligible for crop swap under these relaxed eligibility requirements, and they're calling and they're participating. I think the most exciting part of the changes, though, that we've made to the crop swap framework have to do with the new types of projects that are eligible under the program. So I mentioned before that when we first started out, we only paid for switching from one crop to a different crop that used less water. Well, now we still do that. That's still a good thing to do, and we're still accepting those types of projects. But we also pay for avocado rootstock upgrades. And what I mean by that is we will pay a grower to remove his or her mature avocado trees that are grafted onto some older kinds of rootstocks, remove those trees, get rid of them, and replace them with juvenile trees that are grafted to more modern rootstocks that are both disease resistant and salt tolerant. So we're getting a lot of phone calls about this program, and there are a lot of people who are wanting to participate. Just based on my conversations with people, I think we have about 36 or 37 inquiries into that new type of project. And we're looking at an additional $750,000 worth of projects that we could see as a result of that framework change. So you can get up to $6,000 per acre for that type of project. And that's based on the water savings. All of the crop swap projects, all of the financial incentives that we provide as part of the crop swap program are based on the water savings. So $6,000 per acre for the avocado rootstock upgrades. The one thing that the district asks for in return for that financial incentive is water conservation. And the way we encourage that water conservation is by lowering the allocation, the water allocation in the area where the trees were replaced to 0.3 acre feet per acre in that first year. And we increase the allocation incrementally year by year until year 7, when the trees have reached maturity, and we raise it back to the 4.68 acre feet per year, which is what all mature avocado trees are allocated under our tiered rate structure for agricultural accounts. So Crop Swap 2.0, it's new, it's improved. We've relaxed the eligibility requirements. We're allowing the avocado rootstock upgrades, and there's a lot of customer interest in this. I encourage everybody to, if you're interested, to contact me and get your name on the list. There's about $2 million in remaining funding in the crop swap program. So overall, it was a $4 million project. There's $2 million in funding remaining. I mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of customer interest, and $750,000 in projects are in the queue. So if all of those go through, we don't have $2 million left. We have $1.25 million left. And at the rate things are going, I'm not sure how much longer that remaining funding will be available. Something to consider in terms of timing for your crop swap projects is that they need to be complete by mid-2023. I know there are some issues with availability of plant material for those new avocado rootstocks, those Dusa Marinskis that everyone's using. So if you're planning on participating, keep that deadline in mind, mid-2023, and some of you might have to get your order in now for your new trees. Last thing I wanted to mention about crop swap is that I heard just a few days ago that there could be some supplemental funding available through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or the NRCS. I talked with good old Bob Hewitt and Bob Dunkel up in San Jacinto, the NRCS office in San Jacinto, and they are telling me that their EQIP program, their Environmental Quality Incentives program, will help pay for mulching. And they say that if a crop swap customer removes their avocado trees and chips them on site, creates them or transforms them into mulch and spreads them across their property, they can qualify for some kind of financial incentive through NRCS's EQIP program. I don't know how much money that is. I don't know what the incentive is, but if you're interested in getting supplemental crop swap funding through the NRCS, I encourage you to contact Bob Hewitt and Bob Dunkel up at their office. And if you need to know how to contact them, you can reach out to me and I'll give you their contact information. So Crop Swap 2.0, we're all very excited about the new changes to the program, and we look forward to customizing it more for the benefit of the agricultural community. The Agricultural Irrigation Efficiency Program is another program that we've had around since about 2010. So for 10 years, this thing's been running. I think we've had upwards of 250, maybe 300 agricultural customers participate in it. And basically what it does is it will help pay for irrigation system upgrades. And the way the program works is that we've partnered with the Local Resource Conservation District, Team RCD, on this one. The way it works is Team RCD will send their irrigation system auditor out to your property. They'll test the efficiency of the irrigation system, and based on the results of that test, they will make recommendations on how the system can be improved. And they'll make specific recommendations about what kind of equipment needs to be installed or replaced. They might even recommend some design changes. And based on their recommendations, we will offer to pay for up to 50% of the equipment costs. So we have all kinds of customers who are participating in this program, all kinds of agricultural customers, anywhere from the 1 acre property to the 25 acre property. And it's resulted in great benefits to the customers in terms of irrigation system efficiency. If you're familiar with the term distribution uniformity, before participating in the program, properties are at about 63% distribution uniformity. After participating, after they've made all the recommended changes that Team RCD makes, you're looking at about 86% distribution uniformity, which translates sometimes into water savings and a lot of times into increases in fruit production. So the Ag Irrigation Efficiency Program is still out there. If you're interested in participating, please let me know. Last topic I wanted to go over is our agricultural policy document. You know, we've had a tiered rate structure for agricultural accounts for more than 10 years. I think it was 2008 when it was first initiated. And a lot has gone on since then. A lot of changes have been made. And there's never been a document that explained how everything works. And that's what the intention of this proposed policy document is. We want it to be a single source of information that customers can turn to just know what the district's existing policies and procedures are for agricultural accounts. So if you were to look at that draft document, there'd be a lot of information in there about eligibility requirements, what kind of property or what kind of meter qualifies as an agricultural account. There's a description of the application process. If there's a property out there that is not agricultural and wants to become agricultural, there are certain things they have to do, and this document explains what they have to do. There's data included in the document about the crop-based water allocations. How much water does each crop get allotted to it as part of its tier 1 allocation? And that is explained in the document. Talks about the variance process, and it also talks about consolidations. And I want to bring up the topic of consolidations because this is the only thing in the proposed policy document that could change from how we are currently doing things. Just to give you a little background on consolidations, for customers who own multiple agricultural properties, they have always been allowed to consolidate their water allocations for their multiple properties into a single water allocation. When we first started allowing that, the only rules were you had to be an agricultural account, and your properties that you were consolidating, the allocations you were consolidating, those properties had to be contiguous to one another, meaning they had to be right next to each other. At some point over the course of the years, that changed to where the consolidations were allowed for properties that were not contiguous. They were not next to each other, and they were far apart. They could be 2, 3, 4 miles apart. As long as they were in the same division, Santa Rosa or Rancho, they could be consolidated. So that's the way we do things right now. If in order to be consolidated, you need to have a property in the same division, and it does not need to be contiguous. In this proposed policy document, however, it is being recommended that we go back to the way we used to do things, which is to require that parcels be contiguous to one another in order to be consolidated. So we're taking this is just a proposal, nothing set in stone yet. We are taking this to the board in April. I believe April 8th is the date of the meeting where the discussion will take place as to whether or not that change is going to be made. So I just wanted to keep everyone updated on that. If you have any questions or concerns about the potential change to consolidations, let me know. I'd be happy to talk you through it. So with that, that is all the information that I've brought for you today. I can go ahead and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Let's see. I don't think I see any questions for you, Justin. Okay, so that is the end of our agenda. If anybody has questions on any of the presentations that we've seen today, you can raise your hand at this time or enter in a question in the Q&A box and we can address it. Questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any come through. No hands raised. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to our general manager, Rob Grantham. You can take it from here.
I want to thank each of you for joining us here today. As you can see, our team works very hard on behalf of each and every one of you. Justin provided us with a couple of great opportunities, and we encourage you all to reach out and speak with Justin directly. I also want to thank the team for the presentation today. It's exceptional, and it's really highlights the caliber of our team. And thank you to Brandon from Met to give us a regional perspective. Finally, I'd like to thank the board members who took time out of their busy day to join us today. Directors Garcia and Gonzalez Brady, Hoagland, and Plummer. So thanks to each of you and the rest of the board for allowing us to put this on. And with that, we thank you and we say have a great day. And Kimmy, thank you for being our MC today. Have a great day, everyone.